Thank you. I'd like just to take this opportunity to thank the Board of Education for allowing us to present this capital program to you this evening. My name is Patrick Cahill. I'm the Assistant Superintendent for Business and Management Services. And with me tonight is Andre Rudiak, the Director of Facilities here at Monroe-Woodbury, and David Sammel, our architect with CPL Architects and Engineers. And we're talking here about our 2022 proposed capital program and referendum. Our referendum date is December 6th, and I'm calling this a capital program because it literally will involve multiple dozens, probably a dozen or more, individual capital projects that'll have to be individually submitted to the New York State Ed Department and get approval through the Ed Department, and we'll have to file paperwork with the Ed Department, et cetera. So it's a fairly involved program. It will take us, I would say, probably 5 to 6 years to do everything, because we're restricted in some ways by having school 10 months of the year. There's certain projects that we can only do in the summer, so it makes it more difficult. We have to operate and plan around the school year. So I'm not going to read all of this. It's the introduction to our capital program, but what we're really talking about is on Tuesday, December 6th, we'll be holding a special district meeting, which is sort of the legal term for a referendum or a vote of the qualified voters of the district. And what we're doing is we're seeking permission or authorization to conduct or initiate a multi-year capital program. And in New York State, it's basically a requirement that we have voter approval to undertake this type of capital program. So the program and the projects that comprise it will address long-standing problem of deferred capital maintenance in nearly every building in the district. And we're not just talking about our 7 school buildings, we're talking about 12 buildings, the 7 schools plus other buildings throughout the district. Voter approval is required. I mentioned that already. The vote will take place here at the Education Center. We typically have our budget votes at Central Valley Elementary, so we're going to actually hold that here, and it'll be from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. on December 6th again. So the project, if approved, would be a $115 million project to upgrade outdated building and infrastructure systems. And this would include, and we're going to get into more details on this, the heating systems, the electrical systems, fire alarms, and CO detectors in our schools, replacement or repair to school roofs, security vestibules in the buildings, the school buildings which don't already have one, development outdoor learning spaces. We intend to refurbish a limited number of classrooms, construct a building which would house bathrooms, permanent bathrooms, and equipment storage on our athletic field and complex, repair or actually replace the tennis courts. Many of these systems, most of these systems are well past their useful life, and in terms of like the building systems require ongoing repair to keep them functional. And I have up there, when we constantly repairing these things, it's sort of like throwing good money after bad, because they are past their useful life, and repair expenses are not eligible for any sort of state aid. Capital projects, like what we're proposing are, and our state aid reimbursement rate is somewhere around 75% for eligible projects. So for every dollar we spend, we're getting 75 cents back from New York State, typically over a 15-year period. So really what we're doing is failing to take advantage of that. It's called building aid, that program. The other thing that we've talked about in the past is we risk sort of a catastrophic failure. So every winter, Andre and I have a discussion. The boiler at you fill in the building is not functioning right. And when we have a problem with the boiler, it's not $1,000 or $1,500 to repair it. It's tens of thousands of dollars to fix it. The other piece I wanted to say is just sort of the majority of these projects in the program, I would characterize them as need-to-have projects. They're not nice to have. They're not frivolous. They're the basic systems of all our buildings, which we've put off doing for years. And I'm going to get into why we've put them off. We've planned this project for a long time. The original list, and I mentioned this at another point, when we looked at everything that we need, the original list was $168 million. And we just looked at that and said, we can't really move forward with a project of that magnitude. And we had to make some difficult cuts and decisions to bring it down to 115. So let's see. So what are we talking about? Let's get into some specifics here with the proposed program. So how did we come up with this? The scope development, that's what we call this, is based on a building condition survey or multiple building condition surveys that we've conducted. And school districts in New York State are required to do a building condition survey every 5 years. And it's essentially, we hire a firm like CPL. We go around the district, we look at our facilities and say, oh, this needs to be fixed, we should replace that. And we basically come up with a list, and we submit that to New York State. New York State uses that as well for their planning purposes for building aid. But we also had meetings with building principals and administrators, directors, and staff, and we turned to our Buildings and Grounds Department, and because they have knowledge of and experience with our buildings, and said, they know about what are the systems that are failing, what are the areas that are problematic, and like I said, we came up with a $168 million list. We also engaged the Palumbo Group. Lou Rodriguez and Scott Butler are here in the audience. They're with the Palumbo Group and CPL to help us with cost estimation and to seek their guidance in putting this plan together. So as I said, we had to trim that list down, that $168 million list, down to a more manageable level. And we did that by using some guiding principles that we had established. And we in consultation with our facilities committee and our capital project task force advisory committee, we identified guiding principles. The number one principle was health and safety. Number two was avoiding imminent failure, building or system failure. Number three was enhancement of educational environment and so forth. And so we used those to prioritize our projects and cut that big list of 168 million down to 115, if you will. So this grid here shows the schools on the left, each one of our buildings, and a very brief description of the proposed project associated with the building, or projects, I should say. On the right-hand side is the other buildings. So this, as I mentioned, it touches on 12 different facilities in our district. So I'm actually going to allow Dave Samuel to kind of go over some of these proposed projects with you.
Sure. Thank you, Patrick. So you can see that this list is relatively exhaustive, right? I mean, it addresses the highest priorities at each of the school buildings and the other buildings, as well as the district's priorities. So the takeaway here really isn't to go through every item or to talk about exactly what the scope is. So you can see generally, like Patrick said, follows the guiding principles, the most critical items, the types of projects that we want to do on our terms and not on nature's terms, like roof replacement or boiler replacement. If you want to turn to the next page. And then the next few slides are just going to be images that give you examples of the types of projects that we're talking about. Some of the highlights are the boiler replacements. So you can see on the slide, it gives you the date that the boilers were installed. So typically boilers of this vintage would have a useful life of 30 to 40 years. And Andre's been working hard to either retube them or change the controls or burners. But at some point in time, it's just diminishing returns. You're just putting money into something that you're not going to get the value back. So for most of these boilers, we're doing water-to-water boiler replacement. What we're going to get is a much more efficient boiler and much better controls. For the ones that you see that are listed as steam to hot water, those buildings are going to get pretty much an entire new heating system. So meaning that a steam boiler has steam unit ventilators in the building and steam piping. So that entire system will be replaced at several schools. Why go to hot water from steam? Steam is pretty antiquated technology, difficult to maintain, difficult to find mechanics who are expert in that. You probably have an advantage because you have several steam systems here, so you probably have a couple of good mechanics, but as they age out, you'll have trouble finding them. Also, water is much more efficient and much easier to control. So if you've been in a steam building where a control fails or a trap fails, which is a part of the piping system, you'll have overheating in one room, underheating in another room. You'll see, you go past a school in that condition and it'll be the middle of winter and all the windows on the second floor will be open. So you're just wasting money. So much more efficient system than the steam system.
These systems are 50, 60 years old. So under the new, right now, any repairs we do, the local taxpayers flip the whole bill.
Correct.
Under this plan, the state's going to pay 75% of the bill to replace them. So I think that's pretty encouraging.
Absolutely. And the energy savings that comes along with it.
Right.
And then this is just, how do you prevent deterioration? How do you protect the value of your assets, which are your buildings? So these are just a few examples. Nothing catastrophic, nothing that's in imminent danger of collapse, but you'll see it's just over time deterioration. So if you look at the masonry on the top left picture and the one in the middle of the education center here, it's just over time, weather takes its toll on masonry and the joints. Whenever water gets into joints, it just builds and builds as through the freeze-thaw cycles in the wintertime. It's just something that if you don't address it, it becomes a problem. We're trying to be proactive and get ahead of it before it becomes a problem. Bottom left pictures, which is Central Valley. I mean, these panels, and this is just my speculation, and I've been through situations like this. So in the 70s, when we went through the energy crisis, I would bet that behind those cream-colored panels, they went right over the windows that were there. So they weren't really well-built, if that's what they are, and I think they are. We're gonna put it back to the way it was, because you can see it's deteriorating. You can look at the windowsill, you see the white, that's efflorescence underneath the window. That means water's getting in that wall and deteriorating that wall. Roofs, many of your roofs are just, they're at the end of their useful life too, outside of the warranty period. So now if there is a leak, you need a repair, it's something that's going to happen out of your repair budget or your capital budget, your annual budget, and not a capital budget. And the bottom picture is just a situation that happens at the loading dock. Again, just over time, some water infiltration. If we don't address it, it's just going to deteriorate further. And this slide is just some other catch-all. So you see at the top, there's a fuel tank that we're going to be addressing at the bus garage. We did talk about enhancing the facilities, and that's what the top slide, top right photos of the slide are. We're going to look to do some outdoor learning spaces to improve the quality of those spaces for the kids. And then you can see at the bottom just some other miscellaneous things that if we don't address them, broken glass block at CV, and a lot of the electrical systems that we're looking to upgrade are obsolete, past their useful life, very, very difficult to get parts to keep them going.
Okay. Thanks, Dave. So why are we doing this now? We've said this in the past, and I've said this in the past. We sort of have this unique opportunity right now, and the opportunity has to do with the existing debt that the district has. And in the next 2 to 5 years, we will be essentially retiring. That means paying that off. And so this time frame enables us to basically reinvest in our buildings. Some of these projects, as I mentioned, have been deferred for years. And have a minimal impact on the budget because we have this existing debt already built into our budget, and as that is retired, we can bring in the new borrowing to deal with some of these problems and some of these building systems that are way past their useful life. We also are talking about improving the health and safety of students, staff, and visitors to our building. The security vestibules is probably the best example of that. We're replacing the fire alarm system, so that's in every school building. They're, again, a system that's aging and problematic. Avoiding imminent failure, I talked about that. Original systems past the useful life. Here we just listed some of the ages of the boilers. So middle school boiler is 54 years old. Central Valley is, the relatively youthful 40 years old. Pine Tree, I did a presentation there for their faculty. And they had the oldest boiler in the district, 62 years old, original to the building. Smith Clove is 54 years old. North Main is 51 years old. So those are, some of the systems that we need to address. We talked about the improved reliability, lower maintenance costs, reduced energy consumption, improving the educational environment. That's super important, and we've put some money in to do classroom refurbishments and the new outdoor learning spaces. I'm just going to go back for a second. So I thought this picture was interesting. This is North Main, and I spoke to the principal, Joe Cota, recently. So this is one of the outdoor learning spaces. It's kind of hard to see, but it's a chalkboard affixed to the back of the building, and there's a curb here, a concrete curb. And so, we talked about enhancing that space, right? Kids go out there, they spend time there, they learn there. when the weather is nice and good. We could make this much more appealing, much more inviting, we'd get more use, and it would just be a much better educational space for kids. So that's what we're talking about. And the bottom line is here, really this last bullet, preserve our schools for current and future generations of MW students and families. That's what we're attempting to do here and what the project is all about. So
One of the things that gave me a lot of confidence on that last slide is that we have the team that was able to maintain something for 60 years. In this day and age where everything's throwaway, the fact that we have the skilled people to make something last 60 years gives me the confidence that when we put capital into this, they'll maintain it in a way that'll preserve it for a very long time as well.
That's so true, Don. We do have a lot of, skilled people, maintenance mechanics, Andre and the team, but we're at a point where it's time.
Let the state pay for it.
That's right. It's time to replace some of these things. So fiscal plan and consideration, so the budget impact is, in my opinion, I would say it's readily absorbed, it's minimal, readily absorbed in the general fund. So you might say, how is that possible? Well, we anticipate getting some additional state aid next year. We've talked about foundation aid being phased in over 3 years. So next year, 23-24 would be the third year. We talked about the energy savings, repair savings that we would enjoy when we initiate the project and have some new equipment in our buildings. The funding sources, there are multiple pieces to this. It's sort of complicated because we are trying to time things by, retiring debt and bringing new debt on. But we've been saving. We just had our auditor here talking about our reserves. We've been planning this for years, and we've been adding money to our capital reserve for, I would say, the last 5 years. So we have $13.4 million. We've been saving for this. We're projecting as part of the fiscal plan to be able to grow that even more to $20 million. So that is like our down payment, if you're buying a home. So whatever we put down, we don't have to borrow, number one. Number two, the other interesting thing about the capital reserve and the down payment with a school district is we receive state aid on that. So even though we're not borrowing and generating interest, the state will give us state aid as though we were. So the more we can put down, the less of an impact, the total project would have. We will be borrowing. We'll be doing some short-term borrowing with bond anticipation notes and ultimately serial bonds. That's how we borrow. We issue bonds. New York State building aid is incredibly important. We've touched on that. I say here that it's 90% aidable. That's fairly conservative. What that means is there are certain expenses, like expenses at an administrative building, which are not fully aidable because it's not an instructional space. But we've been conservative in our estimates, saying 90%. I think that will actually be a little higher. Our building aid ratio is 75% right now. That's conservative too, because it was lower the last couple of years and it's been increasing. So by the time we're finished, all said and done, the aid ratio could be like 80, 82, I talked about the retirement of existing debt and replacement with new debt. So that limits the budgetary impact and the tax impact, ultimately, tax levy impact. And then finally, the final piece is the debt service fund. So debt service fund is about $2 million in that, and it's sort of monies that a legacy of prior capital projects. And legally, you're supposed to use that to reduce the expense for your debt service over time. We've done that, but we also held that and saved that for this project and for this program. And so part of our plan is to assign that $2 million. Assign just means apply it. It's like the accounting term in fund accounting. Apply that over a 10-year period as this is fully phased in to lessen the impact on the budget. So let's talk about the financial impact. So the fiscal is, what are we spending? How are we doing things? Where are we getting our money? The financial has to do with what is this going to cost us year in and year out? So in the first year, we're estimating $197,000 impact, and we're going to phase this in over time. I said 5 years, 6 years. So we're not going to borrow $115 million up front. We're going to borrow as we need the money and as we roll this out. So year one, we're estimating and projecting to borrow $18 million. And so that's how come that impact is lower in year one.
What is year one? What year is that?
Well, we're saying it would be, we borrow in 23, so 24 is when we'd actually feel the fiscal impact. On average, though, if we just sort of cut to the chase, when we're fully phased in, the average annual cost for the duration of the project is estimated at $657,800 for 20 years. So seems like a big number, but in the context of our budget, represents about 1/3 of 1%. So less than 1%, about half of a percentage point on our levy. And that's today, in today's dollars. So over time, that will be, less important or less of a factor. I've said it numerous times. I have another bullet, partially offset by increased energy savings and lower maintenance costs. Being conservative again, we haven't factored that into the $657,000. So that, we think that will be less, but we want to be sort of conservative and judicious in our estimates. The bottom line, and somebody had said to me, why isn't that the first bullet? We estimate that the fully phased-in project would cost the typical resident or homeowner about $38 annually. And that's a property with a market value of approximately $350,000. So, we looked at that. We looked at all types of residential property to come up with that value.
But Patrick, your estimate there, that's assuming you're comparing apples to apples, but if you continue with the current systems, your expenses would be much greater because of the failures of the boilers and things
Correct.
of that nature.
If we
So-
don't do anything,
Right.
that's true.
Right,
Those
it could easily
expenses
be
would
that
grow.
much and some more.
That's right.
Right.
The expenses would grow. That's true, Don. Okay, so, here we're just talking about the timeline and some certain milestones. We're basically at this public relations point. So, we had a start date, I put 10/27, because that's when we really started to ramp up our PR campaign. We've been talking about this, though, and planning this for a while. And the public relations would be ongoing, because we'll talk about this not only up to December 6th, but well after, to keep the public and the community informed about what's going on. The capital vote date is December 6th, Tuesday, December 6th. I was leery, and Dave and I discussed this, leery to start filling in some of these other steps, only because it really depends. It depends on SCD approvals. If New York State Ed Department, their facilities unit, reviews our plans and specifications and approves them, if they're slow, that can hold the whole thing up. So there's a lot of things that are outside of our control that go into this, but generally what would happen, we'd have the public approval if we get that. We would then immediately go into the design phase and the planning phase with CPL and the Palumbo Group to say, what do we want to do? What do we think we can do? If we want to do something, it might have to be something relatively simple and easy to do it for, say, summer of 2023. But the process would be, we develop those plans and specifications. We submit those to the New York State Ed Department, the facilities unit of New York State Ed, presuming it's, easy and fast and seamless, there are no issues, they would approve that. You then have to go through a bidding period. You evaluate your bids. You then award to a contractor. They mobilize, and they start to do work. So there's a lot of steps involved in that, and some uncertainty. But that's essentially the process, and that would have to occur, as I said, for all the different projects. Not all at once. Everything isn't done at once. It's done over multiple years. So that's all we had for this. Any questions or comments?
When is the first Crusader chat scheduled for? And will the community be able to submit questions?
Yes. So December 1st, I believe, is the Crusader chat, and we've gotten some questions, so we put that out there, and we're basically kind of go through this type of presentation in person at the high school, and people can come to that, and then we're going to address questions that we receive in advance